Good evening. My name is Jason Levine, and I serve as the District Coordinator for Social, Emotional, and Behavioral Health Services for Wakefield Public Schools, as well as a school psychologist for Wakefield Memorial High School. I'm very excited to see such a great turnout tonight for a couple of very important topics. Before I begin the evening, I would like to thank the Wakefield Parent Partnership, the Wakefield Unified Prevention Coalition, and the Wakefield Public Schools for helping make this event possible. I would also like to thank the representatives from the various mental health organizations here tonight, including the Massachusetts Department of Mental Health, Elliott Emergency Services, and NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness. Lastly, it's important to recognize our superintendent, Dr. Kim Smith, as well as our school-based clinicians that make up the Wakefield Student Support Team. Thank you for all you do for our students and families. Our first speaker tonight is Tanya Snyder from William James College, formerly Massachusetts School of Professional Psychology. Ms. Snyder is here to talk to you about the Interface Mental Health Referral Service. This is a service purchased by the town and school department, available to all community members of any age. This service is meant to be just one tool in our toolbox of supporting our children and families. Please welcome Tanya Snyder.
Thank you. So I recently joined the Interface clinical team. I'm currently a licensed mental health counselor, but I worked out in the field. William James College, within it, has what's called the Friedman Center, so you'll see that up there, for child and family development. Their claim to fame is they're a center of excellence for the promotion of mental health and wellness and the prevention of mental health disorders. Within the Friedman Center, you guys are a little far away because I took the drive from there today to get here, but they also have play groups and new moms and new dad groups that they offer within the wellness center that are free of charge. So that's kind of interesting as well for the community. The overall mission of the Friedman Center is to connect individuals and families across the lifespan with appropriate information, resources, and each other through those parenting and play groups in order to serve their mental health and wellness needs. We are a school, so we also pride ourselves on training students who are master's and doctoral level that are studying psychology solely in the areas of prevention of mental health issues and child and family development. This is important because we use those students within our practice, so I'll talk a little bit more about that. The Interface mission is to provide resources and referral guidance to appropriate mental health and wellness services. I know you're here at school today and many have children, but we really work across the lifespan, and that's important to know. So it's birth to death in terms of providing outpatient mental health referral services. And we also, they talk about resources, and I'll get into that a little bit more also. We have a web page and some access to resources that are available there as well. So in terms of the process of how the whole interface system works, is we have recruitment. Actually, your speaker today is in our database. When we come to a community, we've been here since 2015, I believe, we ask, who are the go-to people that you already have in the community that you utilize, that work well for you? Because we want to bring those people into our database where appropriate. We also, because we're part of two state initiatives, which I'll talk about, MCPAP and MCPAP for Moms. Those are child psychiatry access programs through the PCPs, as well as the one for moms is for postpartum depression issues or post-pregnancy related issues. But because we're connected to those two state initiatives, we also provide support to them, and they utilize our database to find providers. So it's a very robust database of over 7,000 providers. Those providers have to be licensed. We check their license to make sure they're maintaining them yearly, and we also vet them to make sure there's no disciplinary action against them that would prohibit them being part of our database. We also take feedback from callers, so we incorporate that into the database also in terms of, let's say, we sent you there and you found that the office wasn't really appropriate for a 7-year-old. Sometimes that's just not goodness of fit. You know, we don't always like everybody all the time. But sometimes if we get enough of that feedback, it becomes sort of maybe we don't refer people with 7-year-olds there because it doesn't seem to be a good idea. We also use feedback from the providers themselves around when they change insurances, about availability, and whatnot to keep that database robust and alive. Sometimes people ask, well, you know, my PCP has a database or a list, or so-and-so has a list. I think what's different is that there's, you know, a number of us calling these providers daily, so we really get live time updates about what's going on with that practice, which is different than a paper list sometimes that you haven't, there's just not enough manpower to update that list on a regular basis. So when you call us, we are available Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. I left some cards and flyers out on the table as well, so people can grab them as they walk by. We're a helpline, not a hotline. I like to stress that because we're not available after 5 or before 9 to handle a crisis. Every area has an emergency services provider, and those should be your go-to people in the event of a crisis. If you call us between 9 and 5 in crisis, we will help you try to manage that and get to the right place. But we're really not designed as a crisis service, but a helpline to get you hooked up with outpatient mental health services. The intake takes about 20 to 30 minutes. We've been really busy lately, but generally someone will pick up the phone. We're staffed, we have about 20 members on our team. Some are students, master's and doctoral level students, and then there's about 5 of us who are licensed clinicians or license eligible. So we all sit in the same space. So someone asked me yesterday, well, I'm a little nervous about a student taking on this responsibility. We're all right there to help them should they need it, but this is also what they've been training to do. They've had internships and practice, so this isn't their first time doing an intake. It takes about 20 minutes. We ask you a variety of questions. What's going on? How long has it been going on for? What are you looking for in terms of type of provider, insurance that you may have or want to use, your availability, and the locations that you can travel to. We provide some guidance throughout the matching process, and guidance really means sometimes, I don't know if any of you have had this experience, someone tells you about something, and so you think you want that, but then when you look into it a little bit more, it's not really the right thing for what you need. So sometimes we'll provide some guidance to say, you know, I think what you're really looking for maybe is this, not that, or that sounds like a great idea, but have you thought about this also? So we're really trying to educate and provide some support through the process to help get you hooked up with the right services. We also, like I said before, have the web page, so we may refer you to some articles on there or send you some guides. We have some really great ones about how to choose a mental health provider, because if you've never chosen before, you think, I don't know what questions I might even want to ask when I get there or when I call them. So there's some great guides as well. We present the case to providers. I want to be clear about this. When the caller calls, we provide them a code. It's a number to protect confidentiality. So when we're calling 5 providers to talk about what's going on with you and where you're seeking services and your insurance, we use that same code. So you don't have to ever worry that we're calling 5 different providers and sharing identifiable information about you. It keeps it confidential. When the provider says, yes, I can do all the things you're asking for, we call the caller back and say, we have a possible match for you. Here's their information. And then it's on the caller to make that first appointment. We try to provide 2 to 3 matches, ideally. Sometimes that's easier than others, depending on time of year, location, insurance, availability. But we aim to give you a few choices so that you can really, reach out to them, meet with them, determine if it's a good fit for you and your family. We follow up after we give you those matches to make sure that you haven't had any trouble connecting with that provider, that it's going okay, that you feel like it's a good fit. If it doesn't feel like a good fit, then we usually encourage you to try the other providers we may have given you, or we go back to the drawing board and research because maybe there's a significant change that alters the whole match again. We close the case when you feel like either you don't want to pursue the match anymore, you feel like I thought about it and I really don't want to do this right now. Or it may be that you got hooked up with someone and it feels great and you don't need our services anymore. Occasionally we'll follow up with providers, but that's mostly if you're just having trouble of some kind connecting with them or getting a question answered that we can help navigate for you. So I mentioned this already, but we really do match. So I think this is a different resource than, again, calling your insurance company on the back of the card and saying who's on my, provider list through the insurance, because they may not have the area of specialty you're looking for, they may not work with the age group you're looking for, they may not have the availability you're looking for. So we kind of take that part away from the process and make it easier to navigate, particularly in times of stress. I view it as we remove the barriers that may exist to get into where you want to go. We respect your voice and choice and your concerns for confidentiality. So if someone is adamant about something, it's not my decision to say, oh, I don't think you should be adamant about that. I think you should be adamant about this. We try to work within what the caller wants and what they need. We strive to make a match. That's the link between the provider and the caller within 2 weeks. Again, sometimes based on circumstances, it could take us a little bit longer. They did a research study recently, and I told my boss not to tell people this, but I'm going to tell you anyway. We were able typically to find a match within 2 to 3 days. But we allow ourselves 2 weeks because sometimes it takes a little bit longer. Right now, particularly after school appointments are sort of killing us. There's no real openings in a lot of places until June. So it does depend on the time of year and what you're looking for and how flexible you can be. We are committed to the value of follow-up guidance. So again, another difference from getting a list from somewhere is that we really help you get all the way to the point of hooking up with them in terms of reaching out to you and checking in and seeing how it's going. So that's a difference as well. We also want to teach callers how to advocate for and understand the therapeutic process. So that's sometimes around, talking with the clinician and have you asked this and have you expressed your desire for that, or, have you talked to the school system and see what they might be able to offer, your pediatrician. So we really try to talk to people about giving them some information about other avenues they might want to pursue or talk to other people about assisting with an issue. And we know and demonstrate that access to care is part of care. So one of the biggest things we get for feedback is really that we're caring and thoughtful and kind, and we sort of help that whole therapeutic process begin at the first call of reaching out for services. This is what our website looks like. Again, there's cards in the hallway that have on one side our helpline number and on another side the website address. Every page, if you look under communities, has their own page for Wakefield, would have their own drop-down page. It has links to other services in town, special ed committees and the school system, fire, police. But we also have guides, again, about what do all the acronyms after all our names mean and how important is it to have this acronym versus that acronym. Also about how to navigate insurance, what does it mean to have a copay, what does it mean to be out of network, all of those things that sometimes can be very confusing. Again, that guide about how to choose a mental health provider. And then we have publications, so if you look on the side, there's up-to-date research articles from reputable sources about a variety of topics that may be important to people. There's also a whole teen section that drops down with great information for teenagers. And that's all free of charge, so you can go on there, take things off, print it out. It's available. So I talked about what people are saying. They did a research study between 2011 and 2012. About 43% of the surveyed responded, and they said that 58% had tried to find unsuccessfully mental health services on their own. What we hear most of the time when people finally get to us is that they gave up. They made 10 phone calls. This person wasn't practicing anymore. They didn't take my insurance. They were not available at this time. They no longer see kids. And that's a really frustrating experience. 94% felt like we were helpful in helping them address their mental health concerns. 81% reported that they were meeting with the person that we provided to them. So I think that that's important too, because just getting the connection isn't the whole process, but actually maintaining that connection really is the work. So the fact that 81% were still connected is a really high number. And they felt like the counselors, 99% felt like they were knowledgeable about their mental health concerns and about resources, 97%. So I thought it might be useful to have a little bit of Wakefield-specific data without doing anything that would maybe divulge some confidential information, but we've been in this community since, I believe, 9/1/15. We've had 101 callers from the community since that time, which actually is very good. So it averages around the same amount for this size community and other communities throughout the state. And like other communities we work with, a majority of the callers reported struggles related to depression and anxiety, including several reports. Typically within that time, I think each reporting range had a couple of reports of suicidal ideation. So when I think about that, for me anyway, I know that the town and school system provide this free of charge for residents and students, just how important that is in terms of callers reporting suicidal ideation. So that's the end of my spiel. Does anyone have any questions for me? Okay, so there's information out on the table. I hope you grab it and pass it along.
As a clinician who uses the interface service for our students, I cannot say how valuable interface has been as an addition to our community. Also, there are links to access in the interface website on our student support website, which is wakefieldstudentsupport.com. Tonight's keynote presentation is Anxiety, a Developmental Approach, presented by Dr. Roberto Olivardia. Dr. Olivardia is a clinical instructor of psychology at Harvard Medical School and a clinical associate at McLean Hospital. He maintains a private psychotherapy practice in Lexington, Mass., where he specializes in the treatment of attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, executive functioning issues, body dysmorphic disorder, eating disorders, and obsessive compulsive disorder. He also treats the various issues that accompany learning disabilities, such as stress and negative self-esteem. Dr. Olivardia is a co-author of the Adonis Complex, a book which details the various manifestations of body image problems in men. He has taught courses at the University of Massachusetts Boston and Boston College. He's recognized for his presentations across the country and serves on the scientific advisory board for Attitude Magazine, a valuable resource for individuals with ADHD and learning disabilities. Please join me and give a warm welcome to Dr. Roberto Olivardia.
So thank you all for coming. So I have a lot of information that I might skip around some slides just in the interest of time because I want to leave some time for questions and answers. So anxiety, in my practice, I treat kids as young as 6. I have adults who are as old as 86. And anxiety is one of those issues that is unfortunately a common denominator with all different ages and all different groups of people. First, I just want to reiterate and thank the Wakefield Parent Partnership, the Wakefield Unified Prevention Coalition, and the Wakefield Public Schools for having me here. So let's start with what exactly is anxiety? I mean, it's sort of a word we hear a lot. I'm very anxious, I have so much anxiety. Anxiety is a very internal feeling of distress. You feel very uneasy, and sometimes it's not always rational, and I'll get more into that. Sometimes we can specify the reasons that we're anxious. Other times we have no idea. We just have this physiological feeling. But what anxiety basically is, it's an attentional bias towards something that we're regarding as a threat. Now that threat could be the feeling that we have physiologically, or it could be a situation, but it's almost like we cannot distract ourselves away from that thinking. So it's almost like an overthinking on something. So a lot of the things that people are anxious about are no different than sort of other things that people might think about, but the person who really has anxiety about it can't unthink it. They can't unglue themselves from that thought. People with anxiety think in terms of possibilities versus probabilities. So if you have anxiety, for example, of flying an airplane because of a fear of the airplane crashing, it's not that most of us might not have that in our mind, but for people who don't have anxiety about that, they calculate that the probability of an airplane crashing is extremely, extremely low. People with anxiety have a very hard time doing that because there is a possibility, there's always a possibility that that airplane can crash. And for someone with anxiety, that's where their mind is going to attentionally fixate on. And it makes it very difficult to move through life smoothly if we're always thinking along a possibility theory as opposed to probability. Anxiety is a bit different from fear. Fear is something that we have that sort of feeling about on something that's very concrete, that's happening in the moment, right here and now. Anxiety can exist about things that we're worried about in the future. We can have anxiety about things we said or did in the past. We can have anxiety about ideas, so things that might not be so concrete. And it expresses itself physically, behaviorally, and cognitively. Now we have to understand anxiety actually has an evolutionary benefit, that it's not in some ways totally pathological. We need to have anxiety to some degree because our brains are wired in such a way to be anxious about things, to keep ourselves away from danger and threat. So there is a part of our brain, the little part that's circled there, called the amygdala. And we all have the amygdala. In fact, every animal on this planet has an amygdala, that we do not differ from any other animal. This little thing, this little part of our brain basically keeps us alive. It's the part of your brain that tells you probably shouldn't walk down a dark alley in a suspicious neighborhood. It's the part of you that remembers not to touch the hot stove because maybe you got burned before. It's the part of you that if you see a dog foaming at the mouth, growling, not to pet it. So the amygdala is the part of the brain that, when activated, sets off a whole host of physiological responses. In particular, something called the fight or flight response. And what that does is say, okay, the amygdala is activated, we recognize some danger, and we either have to fight that danger or we have to get away from that danger. So here's a picture, caveman, with a tiger. No part of your brain should relax if a tiger is coming after you. That amygdala is going to do a whole bunch of things. It's going to surge your oxygen levels, so you have now a lot of oxygen to fight or to run. It's pumping adrenaline in your system. It's dilating your pupils, so your vision is sharper to either kill that thing or to, again, find a good exit strategy. It's giving energy to your arms and your legs to, again, run or fight. It decreases your appetite. You don't want to think about hunger when a tiger is coming after you. It heightens all of your senses. And, in fact, our amygdala also communicates with memory circuits in our brain to never forget those threats. And it actually sends circuits to those memory parts of our brain to, if anything, overgeneralize, which means that maybe not just we'll remember that tigers are dangerous, but anything that looks like a tiger, that amygdala, if it's working correctly, is going to activate to tell us, okay, maybe this thing we should be is dangerous as well. The problem, though, with anxiety is, for reasons I'll get into throughout the presentation, the amygdala is activating when, in a sense, it's a false alarm. It really kind of shouldn't be, because there isn't actually a danger. But our minds don't know the difference. I mean, it's quite amazing what sort of our brains and our minds can create, and perception can be reality in terms of what's happening neurochemically. So if the amygdala activates and there is no actual danger, These are a bunch of things that happen. So all of those physiological responses, as I mentioned before, will still happen. The problem is, if you're not actually fleeing or fighting, you're going to get a lot of symptoms that don't feel very comfortable. So you have that fight or flight response, and if you're not actually fighting or fleeing, your muscles are going to start tensing up. You're going to feel a sense of paralysis. Your heart is going to be beating fast, and if you're not actually moving, and if you're not actually fighting, you're going to start getting dizzy because it's beating so quickly that there's such an oxygen surge in your body. Your body is cooling itself because if you're running away, you're going to be sweating, and your body sets in this internal mechanism to cool itself so that it keeps you running. But if you're not running or if you're not fighting, you're going to start getting clammy and you're going to start getting sweaty. If you have a decreased appetite, little digestive energy, and again, you're not moving or fighting, you're going to start feeling nauseous. Your mouth is going to get dry, you might feel a choking sensation, it can be hard to talk. You have high adrenaline and you're not moving, you're going to start feeling a numbness or a tingling in your body. So all of these things happen when we're anxious because our brain is doing everything it's kind of supposed to do, except that it's recognizing something that's not truly a danger. Now what happens is that the brain is wired to see anxiety even if it seems irrational. And so that's why if you say to somebody, there's nothing to worry about, that's not going to work for them 99% of the time. And it's not them being obstinate. It's that literally what's happening is someone kind of internally saying, or the mind is saying, if there's nothing to worry about, then why am I anxious? Therefore, because I feel anxious, there must be something to worry about. So I'm going to scan my environment until I find something to worry about. And this isn't a conscious choice. This isn't someone who wants to be anxious. But when your body is doing that, it is a survival mechanism that's saying, okay, even this person might be telling me there's no danger, but my body's feeling it. So maybe they don't know or they don't see the danger, but I'm going to keep looking. So for those of you who either have anxiety or know people with anxiety, it can sometimes be very frustrating to say, why is this person not reassured by me saying this? Their body and their brain is not allowing them to. So when we talk about anxiety, there is a difference. I mean, all of us have experienced anxiety to some degree. Not all of us have experienced an anxiety disorder, which is a more intense sort of sense of anxiety. It lasts longer. It can lead to massive avoidance of situations, which I'll talk about, phobias, and clinically very out of proportion. And people who struggle with anxiety disorders have a very difficult time self-soothing when they're feeling very anxious or feeling very nervous. And that anxiety generalizes, but way too much sometimes. So for example, in the case of phobias, it could be a phobic response perhaps to a dog that can lead to a phobic response towards any animal. It could lead to a phobic response towards anything furry. So anxiety, again, because the brain would rather err on the side of assuming that there's danger when there isn't, than to err on the side of assuming there isn't danger when in fact maybe there could be. And anxiety disorder can cause impairment in many areas of life functioning. Anxiety disorders are the #1 mental health problem for children and adolescents. And I see kids 6 and 7, 8 years old who struggle with very, very severe anxiety. Which I'll talk about some of the clinical disorders. It's more common than depression, and the rates are increasing. So not only are we identifying it more, and people are getting help more, but the rates are actually increasing. The National Institute of Mental Health says about 25% of teenagers ages 12 to 17 have significant levels of anxiety. That's 1 in 4 adolescents. 8 to 10% of children and teens have a diagnosable anxiety disorder, and about 42% of teens will report that they are inadequately managing their anxiety. They feel like it's not being adequately managed. And studies depressingly show that only 20% of youth with an anxiety disorder access treatment. Those are really, really low statistics. We want that 20% to be 100%. So in the literature, you'll often see that they say that there's the statistics that individuals with anxiety disorders are more likely to be female, that girls are more affected by it. However, that may not necessarily be the case. I see just as many boys, probably more boys actually in my practice, And I would say with the boys I treat that they have a tremendous amount of shame by having anxiety. I mean, there's still a lot of social scripts that boys and girls are sort of subjected to. And boys, just in general, emotionally, are socialized not to be weak, not to be wimps, not to be like girls, which is a problem. And to admit that you have anxiety is admitting that you don't have control, which in a sort of masculine script is not something that boys feel very proud of. It can feel very emasculating to them. And I would have to say with a good 80% of males, boys and men that I've treated with anxiety, that topic comes up. With girls, the problem is when they have anxiety, it's often minimized by other people. And sometimes they're told that they're being hysterical, they're being dramatic, and it's sort of not taken seriously. And sometimes girls might actually adopt this sort of hyper-masculine way of coping with your anxiety by trying to suppress it, and thinking that, maybe it's easier to sort of do what we typically will see boys and men doing, which isn't healthy. So what are the personality traits? I mean, what kind of person becomes or has an anxiety disorder? And we know that there are actually a number of different personality traits that start to identify. Now, I'll talk about genetics, but what's very important is even before having children, I have ADHD, I have anxiety, some anxiety as well, but I'm ADD. And I know what the statistics are on the heritability of ADD, the genetics of ADD. So when my wife was pregnant with my son, I said, get ready, because I know what it's gonna be. So having ADD, there's a 70% chance I'm gonna have a kid with ADD. That's very, very high. But it's also very valuable that I know that information. It's valuable, obviously, that my wife knew that information. And with anxiety, with all of these things, it's important that if you're a parent that fits some of these traits, if you have a child that does, it's important to understand how this might operate even within the family. Perfectionism, as I'm going to talk about in more detail later, is a trait that's highly associated with developmental anxiety disorder. If you have a child who is quite the perfectionist, who has to do everything perfectly, where failure is not an option, where it's not about the process, it's all about the result, that you want to be careful, because life gets very, very difficult for a perfectionist. Difficulties with transitions and change. Of course, big changes like moving, parental divorce, these things can obviously make people quite anxious, but the person with the anxiety disorder might have a harder time sort of integrating all of that. But that transition can even be with kind of what most people would call small things, transitions between classes, transitions of going from one person's house to the other, transition hanging out with friend number one and then friend number two. These things that some people would say, why would you be nervous about that? Why would you be anxious about that? Someone with anxiety can feel. And you see these traits sometimes at very, very young ages. Difficulty with uncertainty. I have a child I'm working with now who's 8, whose parents brought him in because he would incessantly ask them, now what is the plan exactly? Like, what are we gonna do? What are we gonna do on Saturday? What are the weekend plans? He needed to know specifically, like, what they were going to do on the weekends, and not out of a like, ooh, what are we gonna do in this fun way, but in this very anxious way. And if something changed, which would happen all the time, as we all know, he would have a total meltdown. It's like, wait a minute, but you told me that we were gonna go over grandma's house, and yeah, but we can't anymore because, she's actually gonna not be home, and no, and he just couldn't even deal with that, because what that meant to him is if that changes, then I don't have a sense of how anything works, because that means anything now is unpredictable, and that makes me really uncomfortable. People with anxiety have a very high need for control, and not in a narcissistic kind of way of like, I need, all the power, but more when you have control, you have management. Things are not unpredictable. Things won't be a surprise. Kids with anxiety tend to be people pleasers, and shyness is a very, very strong predictor for a later anxiety disorder. If you have a kid who's excessively shy, now I'm not talking shy the first week of school, but to the point that's much more than what other kids are. Now that doesn't mean if your kid's shy, they're definitely going to develop an anxiety disorder, but it is a very, very strong predictor. Now, on the upside, I always say to my patients and parents that any condition, whether it's OCD, whether it's ADHD, anxiety, I always see as like a coin. You have one part of the coin that has all this slippery slope that can take you to dark places, but then you have another part of the coin that almost has like certain aspects to it that are very adaptive. And what studies actually show are people who struggle with anxiety also tend to rate much higher on empathy, much higher on sensitivity. They tend to be more emotionally intuitive and often have more vivid imaginations. Now, as someone who has had various aspects of anxiety through my life, I have an extremely vivid imagination. And at some points, that's a great thing. But at other points, like after seeing The Exorcist when I was 9 years old, which is the worst thing I could have done, I imagined what it would feel like and be like to be possessed by the devil. And so for the next 3 years, I had a lot of nightmares about seeing that movie. So I like my imagination, but I just don't want my imagination to go there. But you can't, it's like you can't throw the baby out with the bathwater. So it's important, as I always tell my patients, we want to keep those aspects of it, but of course not have the parts of it that work against us. So nature or nurture, where does anxiety come from? Generally speaking, for most conditions, the apple never falls far from the tree. I have a parent that has anxiety. You can sort of see it, in the family. I mentioned ADHD. It's, come to my house on Thanksgiving and you'll see what that looks like. But with anxiety, studies show about 30 to 40% of the variability is genetic. So it has a genetic component. It's not like it's 90% genetics, so that means that there's a lot of it that also has to do with the environment. But 30 to 40% is also pretty high, which means, and I rarely will see somebody with anxiety that doesn't have another biological family member that has significant traits of anxiety. Typically a parent, but also within siblings. And there are a lot of complex factors as to whether, even if we have a genetic predisposition, even if you have two parents that are anxious, that doesn't mean you're going to be anxious. You have a higher likelihood of being anxious, but there are lots of factors that determine whether those genes are flipped on or whether they're flipped off. Certain anxiety disorders, and if I have time I can go more specifically into them, the social anxiety, which is fear of new social situations, someone who's extremely sensitive to any kind of rejection or any type of criticism, to the point where they're constantly in their head self-monitoring how they're walking, talking, eating, how they come across to other people. Social anxiety, obsessive compulsive disorder have much higher genetic influences. The younger the age of onset, so the younger you see someone with an anxiety disorder, the more likely actually genetics tends to play a larger role. But environment and culture also play a very large role. And one of the things that is often hard to tease apart is, if you were raised by a parent that's anxious, a lot of times, I have parents that feel very guilty, and they'll say, I was the helicopter mom, or I was this, and what I say is, okay, yes, you raised your child, but honestly, they have your genetics. So it's not always, sometimes it's hard to tease apart, well, is it because they were sort of raised by you, and even if you were anxious, or it's just kind of the genetics, like playing its part. So I'm going to go through sort of the various developmental stages just to kind of show kind of signs and traits of what we might see in individuals of certain ages. So with elementary school, and we can see traits as young as, very young, even in preschool at times. As I mentioned before, shyness is a very, very strong predictor of later anxiety. Kids who tantrum a lot. Now, tantruming often will get associated sometimes with like a conduct problem. Even if the tantrum is oppositional, many kids who struggle and who have tantrums are actually quite anxious. They just can't tell you that. They're feeling so uncomfortable in their skin that a tantrum is literally just like this volcanic expression of just not being able to integrate and settle into whatever situation that they're in. So unfortunately, a lot of times, even if the tantrum comes across as oppositional, it's often treated as a conduct problem, when the first thing we should wonder or inquire about as to whether there's anxiety going on. That's often the case. Difficulty separating from parents and caregivers. So separation anxiety. I can still remember my first day of preschool. I'm the youngest of 3 children. My brother and sister are 6 and 5 years older than me. And when my mom said, you know, we're gonna go to pre-kindergarten in our school, and I was like, okay, and then she dropped me off, and she went, and I was like, where are you going? Like, what are you doing? Like, I assume you're gonna be sitting like right here, because it was just me and my mom for 5 years, you know, as far as I'm concerned. And she's like, oh no, I'm going. And I just remember just screaming and crying, like, oh my God, there's no way. And I don't know what I thought would happen with her not being there, but there was no way she was gonna leave that classroom. So she sat in the little chair for probably like a good 2 weeks, and then I don't remember, but she told me years later that it was around Halloween time, and I was drawing a bat, and all the kids thought the bat was cool, and they wanted me to draw it for them, and so I was like, okay, and drew the bat for them, and then I was in my glory, and she just walked out the door. Fast forward many years later, when my son, who's now 12, started preschool, the exact same experience, except I'm the one sitting in the little chair and doing the exact same thing. And I'm like, wow, this is funny how, you know, full circle. But this difficulty separating can also be in your own home. So I've treated patients who, if they cannot be on one floor of the house while their parents are on another floor of the house, they need to be in the same room as their parents. So it can be quite debilitating. That, oh, what are you doing? I need to follow you into the kitchen. Cannot go to sleepovers. Kids who in elementary school have a very hard time being at someone else's house, sleeping in another bed. You'll often hear the anxiety in terms of somatic complaints, typically headaches and stomach aches, and kids who are picky eaters. So one of my areas of specialty is in eating disorders, and I specialize actually with boys and men with anorexia and bulimia. And a lot of times I get these referrals of kids that don't have anorexia or bulimia per se, but they're extremely picky about their eating. They'll eat like 2 or 3 foods, and that's it. And it won't even be around fat content. The foods could be macaroni and cheese, pizza, and chicken nuggets. Now, lots of kids can certainly be picky, but when the kids that I treat they're so super selective about it, and that's often an issue of anxiety, because a lot of times kids who will represent this have a hard time trying new foods. They have a hard time sort of, again, I know what this tastes like, and I don't know what that tastes like, and so I don't know how I'm gonna feel. I don't know how I'm gonna react. What if I choke on it? What if? And so if you have a kid that's extremely picky eater, there's often some anxiety there. These kids don't like surprises and can be quite sensitive. In middle school, with the anxiety, a lot of times you'll see school refusal behavior. So with school refusal, anxiety is typically at the top of the list. Bullying is probably up there as well. Anxiety over having been bullied, but it could be, as I talk later, academic anxiety. There are lots of different reasons, but anxiety is usually the main component of school refusal. Middle schoolers who are anxious have difficulty making friends and keeping them. You know, kindergarten, it's easier. A lot of times friendship circles are by kind of how the parents often will sort of congregate, and so you have your kindergarten class, but as you get into middle school, your parents aren't managing those friendships anymore. You have to manage those friendships more. And kids who are anxious have a very, very hard time, and it's not uncommon for kids to have their elementary school pack, and then in middle school it sort of starts drifting apart and breaking apart, and that's because they're not able to sort of continue and maintain all that needs to be maintained. They might let go of commitments. These might be kids who love playing baseball and band, and then it's just, they want their lives just simpler and more isolated. They become more aware of real world dangers, academic anxiety, and again, these kids can sometimes appear obstinate and they're not often going to say, I feel anxious. They'll say, no, I don't want to do this, I don't want to do that, and can almost seem angry, but very, very often what underlies that is anxiety. You'll see fidgeting and attention problems, and not ones that are related to ADHD, which I'll talk about later, frequent trips to the school nurse, not turning in homework, and a high rejection sensitivity, and not just true rejection sensitivity, but even a perceived rejection sensitivity. I feel like that person doesn't like me. Why do you feel like they don't like you? Oh, I don't know, and they looked at me wrong, or And it turns out that there's just this, again, this physiology where people have this extreme aversion to any kind of rejection. Being, am I going to be the first one picked to play kickball? Am I going to be the last one picked? Kids who mature earlier in puberty tend to have sort of higher rates of anxiety. Now, body image-wise, as I mentioned, working with eating disorders, we find that body image actually for boys who mature earlier tends to be better. For girls who mature earlier tends to be lower body image. But with anxiety, even those boys that have a more positive body image developing, it doesn't make them less anxious. In fact, it can make them more anxious because now your body's changing in all these ways and your mind has to sort of accommodate to like what all of this means and the expectations. In high school, I see a lot of people, again, with eating disorders, and so anxiety can manifest into body image problems. Eating disorders, social status, where you stand with other people. You start to hear, as I work with a lot of seniors who are graduating, fear of the future, of college distress. But you also hear almost this kind of existential anxiety around making your mark in the world and having purpose. Kids who are afraid of growing up and really afraid of the world. And again, not in the ways that all of us might be, but in ways that are keeping them up at night, in ways that are preventing them from doing the things that they enjoy, that they really want to do. There is an option overwhelm. We live in a culture where we honestly have too many options on too many things. I remember once, I used Arm & Hammer baking soda toothpaste. I love Arm & Hammer baking soda. When I was a kid, my mom used to actually put actual baking soda on the toothbrush, and we'd be like, now I'm glad that she did that. But I went into a CVS, and instead of my classic Arm & Hammer baking soda toothpaste, there's literally 20 varieties of Arm & Hammer baking. And here I am standing there for 20 minutes do I get the tartar control? Do I get the fluoride? Ooh, this has an extra little strip. I don't want that many options. Just give me maybe 2 or 3 and I'm good. But kids really cognitively are not equipped to handle that many options. And having worked with a lot of seniors who applied to colleges, I have a lot of strong opinions about what it means to apply to 18 different colleges, which a lot of my patients applied to. Depression, self-harm is a very common manifestation of anxiety. And what I mean by self-harm is cutting oneself. It could be burning. It could be picking, either skin picking, hair pulling, and which is different than trichotillomania, which is a compulsive hair pulling, but people who are pulling as a way of self-soothing their anxiety. And addictive behaviors such as alcohol and marijuana, you'll see, is ways of trying to deal with anxiety. But anxiety in 2017, it really is a different world. And particularly with parents, when I work with teenagers, I fully appreciate what it was to be a teenager at the time that I was a teenager, which was not easy. I mean, it was, it had its ups and downs as well, but I would not want to be a teenager today. I'm very glad that I didn't grow up with the internet because I would have been glued to it. And as someone with ADD, I would have never gone to bed because I would have been watching YouTube, all night long. But studies actually show that increased social media use is associated with increased anxiety in 11 to 17-year-olds. Now the question is, what's the chicken and what's the egg? Is it that kids who are anxious just use social media more? Or is there something about using social media more that engenders anxiety? We haven't quite figured out yet. But increased social media use is also associated with obesity and sleep deprivation, which are highly associated with increased anxiety. So we have this sort of model of how social media plays a part. Managing one's identity was just simpler to do pre-internet. I mean, think about it, you went to school and how you manage your identity was what you did in the present moment, really. There was no other life that your identity had. Now, people have an identity that's constant. It's never ending. It's online. It's going. And you have to manage that. That is a tremendous amount of work. And I hear that from my patients. They are overwhelmed by it. They're managing their Snapchat, their Instagram, their Facebook. They're managing sort of what this person is saying, what that person is saying, managing all their texts and everything. And there is, what we call a FOMO, like the fear of missing out anxiety, which is a real thing. So I have patients they go to bed at 2 in the morning because there's a group chat going on. If you go to bed at midnight, you're missing out on 2 hours of some really good data and really good gossip and really good that the next day at school everyone's talking about, and if you don't get it, you're out. You're just out of the loop. It's so temporary. The idea of connection and relationships is completely changed. I mean, it's really remarkable. Kids who, they literally get stressed about when they post something. They're looking, how many likes have I gotten? The instant feedback and that need for instant feedback is constant, and it causes a tremendous amount of distraction and anxiety. So the culture today is a very temporary one, and one that's extremely instant gratifying. And this is a quote from Carrie Fisher, who was a wonderful advocate for mental illness, and she had bipolar disorder. She said, instant gratification takes too long. These results show, that these individuals who have increased worried about their status and about their relationships, and I hear it from these kids, from these middle schoolers, from these high schoolers, that their rank in their social group has sort of gone up and down, that it's not this sort of consistent feeling. There's no security that they're feeling. They're overwhelmed by options, and they're presented with information on the internet that they shouldn't be consuming. But as a result, the expectations are higher. Now, on one hand, I think, wow, I remember the internet and all of that really started to kind of come about at the end of my graduate school career. And I thought, if I had right now, I remember writing my dissertation, I would have to spend days in the library, go through, find out the journals, I had to Xerox the articles, I had to come home. Now, being part of the Harvard Medical School faculty, I can literally, what would take me 20 hours to do could take me 15 minutes to do now. I have access to every scientific journal that is click, 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 oh, New Zealand Journal of Psychiatry, done. And I think, wow, that would have made my life so much easier. But then, at the same time, would it have, or would the expectations have are the expectations higher because people know that you can get that information? And honestly, the expectations are higher. What kids are expected to do and expected to produce is much higher. So I'm not completely knocking social media. I love the internet. I love all the wonderful things. I'm a music fan. I love getting access to music. I love all of that. However, as a parent, it really concerns me, and it's something that we have to really manage. The millennial generation is really expected to go far beyond their pre-internet counterparts. In addition, there's a lot of anxiety around, I need to kind of be someone. I need to make my mark in the world. I hear this a lot from teenagers who really have a lot of worry and anxiety about this. They have exposure to a lot of privileged, wealthy, famous individuals. Of course, Kim Kardashian is sort of the symbol of that. But we live in a culture where there is a sort of cultural narcissism around you need to stand out. Okay, it's not enough that you're a great swimmer, or that you're a great athlete, or you're a great musician, but how are you going to be so unique? How are you going to kind of get be more unique than even other good swimmers and good musicians? And it's really hard for a lot of these teenagers to sort of take that in. Studies also show that puberty is affecting people at younger and younger ages. And again, here's the selfie generation of individuals who constantly have to sort of manage themselves online. Across all ages, we see sleep issues. Anxiety can manifest in your sleep, in eating dysregulation, either with eating too little or eating too much. Individuals who struggle with anxiety require repetitive reassurance. So you might have a child that's like, well, are you sure this is going to be good? Are you sure? Are you sure? This kind of reassurance. And when a child is young, you might say, sure, yep, it's okay. But you don't see it abating at all with people with anxiety disorders. It just, if anything, it gets worse and worse. Somatic symptoms and a lot of excessive time. Parents will say that they kind of knew that there was some significant anxiety when it would take so much time to console their child or to coax them into what they felt were sort of more normal situations. They knew it was beyond what other people were feeling. I'm going to skip these slides briefly and maybe go back to them, but just in a nutshell, the statistics on adopted children find that they have double the risk of anxiety disorders. Ethnic minorities and gay, lesbian, and bisexual youth have about double to 2.5 the risk of anxiety. Because we're in an academic arena, I'm going to focus on this group at risk, which is what we call the neurodiverse groups. And that includes individuals with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, learning disabilities such as dyslexia or processing speed issues, the autism spectrum disorders, executive functioning deficits, individuals who have a very hard time with prioritization and organization, and the execution of certain goals. There is a tremendous amount of stress that these students experience, tremendous amount. So I have a son who's dyslexic. I was definitely on the mild dyslexic side myself. And it's very difficult with this group of people when the effort that you put into things is not generating the result back. That's a very, very frustrating thing. And so there's a validity in some ways to some of that anxiety because, yes, you do have to study sometimes more than the person next to you. And it's very easy to start wondering, well, am I stupid? Am I just not as smart? There's a chronic levels of anxiety. This has been very well documented in terms of the increased prevalence of anxiety in these groups of individuals, whether it's academic, whether it's social difficulties. So people on the autism, kids on the autism spectrum disorders who might have a difficult time reading social cues. There's a lot of anxiety, especially in middle school and high school, where your social life and status is everything. And if you're someone that has a very difficult time managing that, there's going to be a lot of stress and a lot of anxiety around that. So, I've talked about the symptoms and the traits, but what I really want people to walk away with is the insidious impact of anxiety. That we know what those symptoms, but on a big picture level, when you struggle with anxiety, you become oriented in the world toward avoiding anxiety and moving away from things, as opposed to moving toward things. See, what we want for our children is we want to move towards things that make us happy. We want to move towards things that are our goals. We want to see something and say, yes, I want that. That makes me feel good. That gives me passion. People with anxiety, if it goes untreated, they're not oriented in the world that way. They become oriented by, ooh, what am I trying to get away from? There's no question in their mind as to what they're moving toward. They're just trying to get safe. It's like if you're in a burning house, you're just looking for the exit. You're not thinking about, oh, should I, go down this room or this room? You're just trying to get out. And where I see this in its really most insidious impact is adults that I treat who have never been treated for anxiety, so individuals who are in their 40s and 50s, who literally don't know what they enjoy or like or feel a sense of purpose because their entire lives were all around not feeling anxious as opposed to feeling happy, which is different. To not feel anxious is not the same as being happy. Being happy means you're connected to something that's your values, to your passion, to something that gives you pleasure. To not be anxious means you're just not feeling anxious. And that can leave people with this sort of emptiness around, okay, I'm going to do this because it doesn't make me feel anxious. It's very easy also if you're constantly anxious to really feel a sense of learned helplessness, which means that no matter what I do or say, I'm always going to feel this way, so why bother trying? So for the kid with dyslexia who hasn't been identified and is not getting the services that he or she needs, they start thinking, why bother trying? Like, I'm just gonna fail anyway. So they learn to be helpless. Individuals who have severe OCD, who think, oh my gosh, like all these rituals that are going on in my head, like what's the point? Like why bother even leaving the house? So the person who has panic attacks, who becomes agoraphobic, which is someone who's housebound with anxiety. So no one who's agoraphobic, by the way, ever thinks I'm going to be stuck in my house for 10 years. Every person I treated with agoraphobia, it literally starts with one day they think, oh, I don't want to get a panic attack, it's stressful, I'll just stay in today. That's how it starts. And then tomorrow, because I felt relief today by staying in, the brain now starts to get conditioned to feel even more relief tomorrow and make being outside more threatening. And there, 10 years can go by. It's really not difficult to sort of see how that can happen. Low self-esteem. It decreases your confidence in yourself to engage and to take risks. When you have anxiety, you also learn not to trust yourself, because especially if either you've been told or it's been proven, well, I guess there isn't a danger teacher here, and I feel that there is. So maybe everything that I feel is not accurate. Maybe everything I feel isn't sort of real. So why bother putting myself out there in any way? Anxiety stalls that development of discovering the passion. You feel ineffective. You can feel done to. So I have a lot of individuals who are very angry and who might come to me for anger management issues. And again, with some kids who might have tantrum and anger management, and really they're angry because they feel like they got a really bad deck of cards. And they'll say, I feel like the world is just doing me in. They feel like victims of the world. They feel very victimized in a sense by the harshness of a very sensitive nervous system. And they can feel very isolated. And suicide, interestingly, I was actually looking for this presentation whether there were articles that had specifically isolated the risk of suicide for people with anxiety disorders independent of a comorbid or an associated mood disorder. So obviously depression and bipolar disorder is the most common associated with suicide. And prior to about 5 years ago, it just so happened that most people who have mood disorders also have anxiety disorders, so it's hard to tease apart. However, in the last 5 years, there have been pretty robust studies that have just isolated individuals with just OCD and no depression, people with panic disorder, and they find that, yes, suicide is an actual risk, independent of depression for individuals with anxiety. So I'm going to go briefly through the anxiety disorders, and then I'm going to get into treatment. So separation anxiety disorder, as I mentioned, this is typically the child. It could go into adolescence who has a lot of worries about being separated away from their caregiver. They have a very hard time being by themselves. It can be associated with nightmares, bedwetting, and again, lots of tantrums around any kind of separation. Panic disorder is, or what we call a panic attack, is someone who feels this sudden intense fear, and sometimes it's completely out of the blue. And it doesn't, they just don't even know where it's coming from. It can last minutes. You feel short of breath, you feel your chest heavy, you're dizzy, your heart is pounding, you're feeling nauseous and sweaty, and you feel like you're losing control. But in a nutshell, what a panic attack is someone who is getting anxious about getting anxious. So in other words, what we find is really people with panic disorder, if they were even at very low level forms, if they accept, okay, I'm feeling sweaty right now, or let's say if I was, I remember I gave a talk at Bates College in Maine many years ago, and public speaking has never been something I've been anxious about, but this particular talk, it was like 100 degrees in the room, it was so hot. And it was in the middle of winter in Lewiston, Maine, and my mouth was like really dry. And so it was like going like that kind of sound, which drove me nuts. And I don't even know if other people were affected. And that's what it started. And my head was like, oh my gosh, that sound is so annoying. Like people are gonna be like, why? Like he should just get something to drink. And so I'm talking while my mind is doing this. And if I had to do it again, what I would do is say, you know what, I'm gonna just pause for a second, and outside there's a water machine, I'm gonna grab a bottle of water and just get some water in my mouth, but I didn't. And it was it would have been a great YouTube moment, because I literally had a panic attack in the middle. It just escalated, and the more I didn't want people to see how anxious I was, the more anxious I got. It would have been so much easier to say, oh, I have this dry mouth, which now I would do, and I'd share with you all, I have a dry mouth, I need a sip of water, but at that time it wasn't. And then my heart, I remember, I thought, oh my gosh, I bet people can literally see my suit like going like this, and I remember my legs were numb, and I was talking, and to be honest with you, I didn't even know what I was saying. I ended the talk, I'm like, did I even make sense? Because all I was in my head. Social anxiety disorder, also known as a social perfectionism. These are individuals who really cannot bear the idea that they're not going to be liked, and even to very pathological degrees. Not everyone is going to like you, but the idea that somebody, and sometimes it's not even around somebody not liking you, it's not knowing whether someone likes you or not. That can be more debilitating for people with social anxiety. But individuals with social anxiety that I treat have a hard time even standing at a bus stop or in a Starbucks line because they're wondering, do I look odd? How should I hold my body? How should I be? When they have any social interactions that night, they're mentally obsessing and reviewing, okay, I said this and they said that. Oh, was that offensive? Did I offend them? Did I do, oh, now they're gonna think I'm really stupid, or I stuttered there and that. And it can be, it's very, very obsessional. They often will fear venues in which they'll feel any kind of level of evaluation, whether it's participating in sports, going to parties, restrooms. I've treated individuals who have a lot of bathroom anxiety for the fear of, even if they're in a private stall, but the idea that they're going to the bathroom and knowing that somebody else is in the bathroom, a complete stranger. But this is what social anxiety can do. Phobias, all of us can relate. I'm sure all of us have our own phobias. Where it can become a real disorder is where it's really causing a life impairment due to the nature of the phobia. So if you're afraid of anaconda snakes, you're living here, you're gonna probably be okay because you're not gonna be encountering any. If you have a fear of injections, that's going to be a very hard thing every time you have to go to the doctors. As I have patients that just don't go to the doctors, even when they need, either because they're diabetic or some other issue in which they need that. I treat people, I put vomiting, because there's a phobia called emetophobia. People who have a fear of vomiting. And interestingly, people who have this fear are people who rarely vomit. And so what we know about phobias is when you actually do and experience some of these things, your anxiety actually goes down. Generalized anxiety is excessive worry about life circumstances, so it could be the things that we all worry about, but to, again, a very impairing degree, to the degree that you cannot shift your attention away from. So it's maybe worrying about how you're going to pay for your kids' college finances in 5 years, which of course would be a worry for any parent, but you can't worry about that to the point where you're not sleeping at night. Where you can't think about anything else, where you're not present and able to do your work. So they can't stop it. And it can seem rational at first, but the intensity of it, the chronic nature of it, make it disordered. OCD, one of my major rotations at McLean Hospital where I trained was at the OCD Institute. OCD is individuals who have obsessions, which are recurrent thoughts. They could be images, they could be impulses that are experienced in such a way that is very intrusive, and it causes someone an incredible amount of anxiety. So of course people probably know of contamination concerns, so I'm touching this, I don't know who touched this podium. If I had OCD about something like this, my head could be thinking about all the people that touched this thing and what it's doing to me in that moment. And those thoughts are not just even necessarily real life issues. They could be about anything. And the individuals with OCD try to suppress that. They try to neutralize that thought, either with another thought or an action. And they recognize that it's this thought that they're having in their own mind, but they can't stop. And the more they try to stop, the more they experience it. And as a way of neutralizing it, a lot of people with OCD, not everyone has compulsions. People can have OCD just with the obsessions. But a compulsion is a repetitive act that's meant to basically take away the anxiety. Now with hand washing for contamination, that makes sense if you think you touched something that's germy, but it could be something that has nothing to do with the thing. So for example, I have a patient now who has the intrusive thought that every time he sees the word cancer, that he's convinced that someone in his family is going to get cancer. And so the only way for him to, and not only is he convinced, but he feels responsible that someone in his family will get cancer unless he says 50 Our Father prayers in that moment in his head. Now this is a 10-year-old with severe OCD. So, and then when he says the 50 Our Fathers, his anxiety goes down because his mind, his brain has told him, this is what will make your family not get cancer. And so once your body feels that reduction in physiology, your brain says, okay, we have to keep doing that. We know that this works, because again, remember the amygdala communicates with those memory circuits. So then, but it didn't start out as 50 Our Fathers, it started with 1. Then that graduated to 10, to 20, it just gets worse and worse and worse. And for him, if he doesn't do the Our-Fathers, then he is responsible for giving his family cancer, someone in his family cancer. It's a tormenting disorder, OCD. It could be literally anything. I have a teenager I'm working with now who has the intrusive thought that he's going to stab someone in his family. And he's not homicidal. This is not someone who is a sociopath. He doesn't want to cut his meat with a knife because he feels he's going to stab someone in his family. And the thing, OCD has a way of capitalizing on the very thing that someone fears the most in some ways. So these rituals are very, very built in. Now, perfectionism is not a clinical disorder, but it's something, especially for an audience like this, is very, very important to mention. I wouldn't be surprised at some point in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual that we'll see this as a disorder, but we think of this as sort of in the OCD spectrum, so to speak. And these are individuals who often will set unattainable goals, but manage their self-worth and self-esteem through what they produce and what they accomplish, but only through what they produce and accomplish. So the idea is, I'm not a good person, worthy person, unless I get the A. As opposed to, maybe I might study hard and I can still be smart, and maybe I end up with the B. That doesn't work. People who are perfectionists also don't celebrate success. They're just glad they didn't fail. So they're like, they get to the finish line, it's like, oh, okay, I didn't fail. Like, there's no internalization of, yes, I did it, which is what is necessary for self-esteem, is we need to be like, wow, I did this, I worked hard, and I did it, and I accomplished it. If you're a perfectionist, you're not thinking about that. You're like, okay, I made it in the finish line, I didn't fail, okay, I'm good today. The problem is that tomorrow you're starting right back at square one because there's no foundation for your self-esteem. It's all about the result and not the process. And individuals who are perfectionists are very black and white in their thinking, like either I fail or I don't. I once treated a patient who was from MIT, and freshman year got a B+ and attempted suicide because he got a B+. And now most people would say this is like crazy, but in his mind, he's like, I'm competing with people who are getting straight A's, who are going to get Nobel Prizes, who are going to, and in his mind, it wasn't just about the B+, it's this B+ is going to make me less stand out to get this internship or this, which means I'm not going to get a good career, which means I'm going to end up homeless, and I'm going to shame my family who has done so much to get me here, and it just escalates. That's where the thinking goes. So it's not about the grade per se, it's about where that individual is connecting that to. In addition, but a lot of times when people say, oh, they're perfectionists, they're like, oh no, I'm not a perfectionist. I don't get straight A's, or I don't get, that's not the definition of a perfectionist. A perfectionist is someone who feels like they should be doing those things. Interestingly, most perfectionists are actually not very productive. Because if you feel like you have to write the perfect paper, if you feel like you have to do the perfect thing, many times you're not going to feel ready. You're going to be like, I can't do that. And you'll often see these real difficult levels of procrastination, and often just a complete avoidance. You also avoid asking for help. People who are perfectionists don't want to look like they don't know. And so they don't go to their college professors. They don't ask their parents sometimes for help, because then they're exposing themselves as not being smart, as not being bright. They can be very, very harsh self-critics, and they can often be narcissistic even to other people. I mean, some perfectionists I work with, they wonder why everybody isn't like that. They're like, I don't understand. I couldn't live with myself if I didn't have these kind of standards. But of course, this leads to burning out, it leads to inertia, low self-esteem, and perfectionism is a very dominant personality trait in individuals with obsessive compulsive disorder, individuals who complete suicide, and individuals with anorexia nervosa and social anxiety. Because of course our self-esteem should be based on, of course we can base some of our self-esteem on our accomplishments, but it's really more around the things that are fixed about us. So if I ran a half marathon in October, I felt very proud of myself. I wasn't a runner, really, a couple years ago I started running. But it wasn't, I didn't care about what time I got, I didn't care. What made me the most proud and what built as a foundation in my self-esteem was not necessarily finishing that, but the fact that I trained for it, the fact that I stuck to that schedule, and what that told me about myself is, wow, I'm a pretty hard-working person. I'm somebody who I can put a goal out there and I can complete that goal, which means that now can generalize to lots of different things in my life. That's where self-esteem comes from. It's not about, oh, I came in, I mean, I think, I don't even know what rank I came in, but it was probably 300th out of 302 people. I didn't care. So what do we do and how do we treat anxiety? So first is just general self-care. Because anxiety affects the way that people eat, the way people sleep, that this is the first thing I address with people. How are you eating? Are you eating at least three meals a day? Are you eating nutritiously? Are you binging? Are you restricting? Are you sleeping? How many hours of sleep do you get? Most perfectionists, for example, I mean, I treat college students who routinely will get 2 to 3 hours of sleep a night. High schoolers, unbelievably, I mean, now this is again where I credit my parents who, you know, we didn't have a color TV until I was in high school, and my parents could have, I mean, we weren't by any means, well, we were a middle-class family, but we could have afforded a color TV. But they knew that would make TV, which I love to watch, that hasn't changed, very, very attractive. They got cable the day I went to college. I know, I'm like, what? Like you couldn't wait even 24 hours, like the day I moved into college. But honestly, looking back, that was the best thing they could do, because I would have watched MTV, when MTV really was MTV, I would have watched it 24 hours a day. How are you sleeping? Laughter. Are you doing things that are enjoyable, that are humorous? Laughter is actually a very natural antidepressant and anti-anxiety. When we are laughing, we are stimulating neurochemistry that is the complete opposite of when we're anxious. So it's a guaranteed anti-anxiety and depression. What are you doing things? Are you playing for kids to make sure that they're engaged in that kind of play? So one of the things we do is we really want to target reducing that physiology, because what happens is that if your physiology is activated, as I mentioned before, just telling someone, just calm down, don't be anxious, that's not going to work. You have to really work at just kind of hitting the body, and then your thoughts will follow. And this is kind of a fairly new concept. I mean, it was only really in the mid-60s that Herbert Benson at Beth Israel here in Boston wrote this book called The Relaxation Response. And he said, you know what, maybe instead of our thoughts informing how we're feeling, maybe we have to change how we're feeling, which then will inform our thoughts. And he was exactly right. So things as simple as abdominal breathing, when we take a deep breath, which, you know, a lot of times when people take a deep breath, they suck their stomach in, and that's not correct. You actually want to imagine like a deflated balloon in your stomach, and you breathe in through your nose, and you want to push that air to the point that your belly's actually like popping out. And you hold it, and then you breathe slowly out of your mouth. This is good for all of us in this room to do. I do this at least for 5 minutes, 2 to 3 times a day, just to kind of ground me and center me. I don't know, I'm sure all of us, I've had the sensation sometimes where I go through in a day, and then I might be driving home, and I'm like, I'm like, oh my gosh, have I like been breathing like at all day? Like it feels like I'm just deflated, like, and I think my baseline could be this sort of, you know, I mean, I'm ADD as well, so there's a certain hyperactivity that sometimes I have to kind of just deep breathe for that. Progressive muscle relaxation is a wonderful anti-anxiety thing, and there are YouTube videos that you can check out. There are ones that are directed towards children, but in a nutshell, what it is because the traditional sort of notion of like, okay, close your eyes, imagine a peaceful place, that can work, certainly what we call visualization, but for some people that's not going to work. They almost have to work with the anxiety. So in progressive muscle relaxation, you're starting with your hands, and then you go to your biceps, your triceps, your back, your stomach, your quads, and the goal is you want to tense the muscle group. So you're actually saying, okay, anxiety, I'm going to work with you here, and you're going to tense it till you want it uncomfortable. You're not just closing your hand. You want to dig your nails in there for a good 7 to 10 seconds. And you do it with both hands, and then after 10 seconds, you just release it. Now, when you do that to every muscle group, I guarantee, especially if you have a hard time falling asleep, you will feel more relaxed, because what's going on is in that 7 to 10 seconds, your brain is getting a little dose of that anxious physiology, but then when you release it, it's then saying, oh, okay, I guess I can feel a little anxious, but you're now telling me that everything's safe, and there's actually a real reduction of that physiology. So it's almost like kind kind of working with it, like instigating it a little bit in order to then feel a better relaxation response. And so with your biceps, you'd make a muscle, your tricep, you would extend your arm, your shoulder blades, you want them touching each other, your mouth, you want to open your mouth wide because a lot of people have like jaw issues, a lot of tension that can be in your jaw. And you basically hit all these muscle groups, and I guarantee you, you will feel, the whole thing can take about a good 20 minutes to do, but you will feel more relaxed. And you can do this with kids. They have great YouTube videos out there. You know, pretend you're squeezing a lemon. You know, pretend you're curling your toes, and it's like, oh, and you're just waiting for that 10 seconds to go by, and you're like, oh, you know, I can release it. The other thing it does is once you've done that, at times when you actually feel anxious and your muscles just start doing that naturally as they start tensing up, you actually now have exercised the muscle of untensing those muscle groups, so you're better able to do it at a time when you're actually anxious, because you've basically exercised that. So that is a 5-star kind of reduction of anxiety technique. As I mentioned, visualization, exercise, wonderful way of reducing stress and anxiety. Engaging in your 5 senses. When we engage in our 5 senses, what we are doing is putting ourselves in the here and now. And anxiety doesn't exist in the here and now. Anxiety exists in what could be, what might be, what's in my head, what I'm thinking is happening and perceiving. So our greatest level of control is when we are dealing in the here and now, because we're in the here and now. I used to have a major driving anxiety. When I was in high school, driver's ed was free, and my dad said, you have to take driver's ed, because I'm not going to pay for it, otherwise. It's like, oh, okay. I mean, I was so phobic. I was totally fine with the idea of being a passenger. I even had, it was a joke that a limo would be my first car. I even had an imaginary chauffeur. His name was Sinclair. He was from England. And I was like, okay, I have to take driver's ed. Oh my God, the idea of driving a car was so anxiety provoking. And then I got my license, and I actually said, when the guy told me I passed the road test, I'm like, really? Like, oh, I was hoping, you would say that. I didn't really start driving until my mid-20s, but I can tell you why, what made me so anxious about it is I didn't see it as a sort of fluid process. I was so super conscious of everything you had to do. But I remember driving and thinking, all I need to do is go like this into the next lane, and I could hit and kill somebody. And it functioned honestly like an obsessional thought. Like, I could cause harm to people, like doing this. And then someone could cause harm to me, and I could be killed, like doing this. All by just a little, shift, and I was totally overthinking it. I used to bring extra t-shirts and wherever I was going, because I would sweat right through them. And then the best thing is the big dig, which was happening. I was in grad school at the time, and that was my exposure therapy, and now I don't have an issue with driving. Now, what's interesting though is I was actually involved in a car accident. I was fine, thankfully, but I was driving, and a man was coming down a road, and he's texting. He was in his 50s, and he was texting while driving, and I have cars behind me, one lane, and I'm looking, and there's a stop sign there, and I'm like, is he gonna stop? Oh my gosh, I don't think he's stopping. He went right through the stop sign, bashed into my car. Thankfully, I was by myself, there was no passenger. Literally the metal of the car almost like hit me. I mean, it was a sound I'll never forget. Pushes my car, something like out of a Die Hard movie, pushes my car onto the next lane, that oncoming traffic, I swerve, end up in a Dunkin' Donuts parking lot, my car is completely totaled, I'm fine. The guy comes out of the car, he's having a panic attack. He thought he killed somebody, because if there were a passenger in that car, they would have been dead, there's no question. I'm just fine because I'm safe, everything's good, I actually do pretty well in crisis situations. He's having a total panic attack. I'm like, it's okay, nobody is dead, it's like everything's fine. He's like hyperventilating, so I have my hands on his shoulder. I'm like, calm down, like take a deep breath, someone called the police. The police came, and he's talking to this guy, and he's like, sir, your car, he's like, and he's trying to tell him that's not his car. And I'm like, no, that's my car. And he's like, oh, you're the one that was hit? And I'm like, yeah, I was the one that was hit. He's like, oh, because I don't see this every day. But the irony of that is when one of my worst fears, my worst fear would have been me causing the accident, but my second fear is me getting hit. When it actually happened, I was completely calm because I had to just deal with whatever was there in front of me. There was no thinking about what I had to do, it was my reflexes and my amygdala was working really well to get me out of that lane, to swerve into that Dunkin' Donuts parking lot. My brain didn't fail me. So I was actually fine. I mean, it was strange how cool and collected I was. The cop, I was on my way to work, the policeman had driven me to my office because I had patients to see. My car was totaled. And I called my wife and I said, oh, just to let you know, and I'm talking like this, and I said I was bashed and the car's totally totaled. And she's like, what? Like, she was just totally, she goes, why are you so calm about it? I'm like, what am I gonna do? Like, I'm just kind of dealing, but that's the truth of how anxiety works. When you're in the here and now, strangely enough, anxiety doesn't exist in that kind of realm. So one of the techniques you do to reduce that physiology is attend to your five senses. So when I tell patients, what are you seeing right now? What are you hearing? What are you tasting? What are you smelling? What are you touching? And they'll say, and they might attend to sort of the thoughts in their head. I said, nope, let's just bring it down to your five senses. That could be sort of a quick thing, even for children. Like, what are you seeing? And because we're dealing with what's happening in the here and now, sometimes stimulating senses. One of the best anxiety reduction techniques is by creating a strong level of stimulation that basically makes it difficult to even be in your head because you have to be in your body. Holding ice cubes is a perfect one. It's not harmful to actually hold ice cubes in your hand and have them melt. It feels uncomfortable. It's not harmful. But when you are anxious about something and you're holding ice cubes in your hand, it's very difficult to not pay attention to the ice cubes being melted in your hand because it's so intense of a feeling. If you're, I like to play the drums, like banging the drums. It's hard to be in your head when you're sort of having to keep a rhythm or meter. Hot showers, like these are things that are very quick and very accessible for anybody to do. And for children to even have a list of what are those things that they can do when they're feeling anxious. For parents, it's, the message we want to send is it's okay to fail. It's not okay to call yourself a failure. One of the techniques that I recommend to families is a stress box, where you have this box and people write on a piece of paper something that's stressing them out or something that's weighing heavy on their mind. You put it on the box, and then you sort of pull it out and you read it. Sometimes people write it's from so-and-so, and you probably can guess who is from what. And then everyone sort of weighs in on what advice they can give that person. But what that does is validate, especially to children, that everybody deals with stress and anxiety. They're not the only ones. You don't want to shame. The biggest obstacle, honestly, to mental health treatment for a lot of patients is shame. Is just the shame of having the mental health issue. And that's what we want to eliminate. But also as parents, we don't want to reassure our children too much. We don't want to reassure their anxiety away. And it's hard because you, of course, want your kid to feel safe and you want them to be happy, but the more we reassure everything away, what we're doing is not teaching them how to deal with anxiety when you're not with them. And that's where the separation anxiety and all that gets bred. So it's okay to say, everything's all right. However, what can you do when you're by yourself and this thought, comes to mind? Personify the anxiety. I've had patients call it the imp, the troll, the trickster. Oz, as in the Wizard of Oz, something that looks big and scary, but really is this little old man behind a curtain. And that way you're not working against yourself. You don't see yourself as the enemy. You see the anxiety as the enemy you're fighting against. The imp, there's a great book called The Imp of the Mind. A colleague of mine, Lee Baer, talks about OCD. I think it's a wonderful title. It just captures that. And validate the imp. Also know that we're all parents. We all have our own genetics. And you can have 2, 3 children who are completely different. And as a parent, what makes parenting hard is we're parenting to a certain set of genetics. It's not that, I have 2 kids, they're 2 years apart, and there are aspects of them that are very similar and aspects that are completely different. I have 2 siblings, my brother and I, he's the oldest, we're very close, but extremely different individuals. And so as a parent, it's your job to be like, okay, what are my genetics, and what are the genetics of this child, and how are they gonna mix? Because sometimes if you're the one with anxiety, you might be better able to manage some of the situations of your child who has anxiety because you get it, you understand it. Or you might not be the better and the most effective all the time, and it might be better sometimes for someone else to sort of take because it can be too overwhelming. So you just have to always keep that in check to what you're doing. But of course, it's important also to validate genetics and not to feel stigmatized by that. And that's something that I think is very important, because sometimes people feel, well, am I basically saying, okay, this is in your genes, you're just, this is just whatever, you're screwed basically with these genetics. No, that's not how we're going to see it. We see it as there is a certain predisposition. It doesn't mean that this is going to be something that has to affect you the rest of your life, but it does mean we might have to be a little more careful, that there's more effort that we have to put into this. Genetics does not mean you're inevitably going to have a certain behavior. We want to feel our feelings, not numb them, and so it's so important to teach our kids just emotional literacy. If we cannot numb one emotion. We can't numb anxiety. If we numb anxiety, it's like the Christmas lights, where if one light burns out, they're all going to burn out. What you get is someone who's trying to numb a feeling, they're going to numb everything. And then they become flat, they become empty, and it's very easy then to start thinking, I'm just, what's my purpose here? Like, what's my point? So it's really about feeling those feelings and understanding that when we suppress an emotion, it's like putting a beach ball underwater. We have the beach ball on the water, it's there. It's not that it's not there, but if once we put it under the water, what's gonna happen when we let go? It's gonna pop out of the air like a geyser. When we try to suppress an emotion, we're creating an uncontrollable manifestation of that emotion. So for example, rage is not an emotion. Rage is the result of suppressing our anxiety. Rage is the result of suppressing our anger. Panic is the result of suppressing our anxiety. When we tantrum, depression is not an emotion. Depression is often the manifestation of either a lot of anger that we have, or sadness or anxiety that is just constantly either being pushed away or numbed or involuntarily numbed. Teaching kids assertiveness is huge. That one of the best antidotes against anxiety is, how can you own your feelings? I feel this, I want this, I think this way. Now, it doesn't mean you're always going to get what you want, but there is a great power in being able to communicate that and identify that. Briefly, cognitive therapy basically identifies different patterns of thinking that are very problematic. Like if you're an all or nothing thinker, it is important that there are shades of gray, because if you think it's either an A or an F, then that's going to get you into trouble. If you understand that it's an A, B, C, D, it becomes a lot easier to deal with. Mind reading, for example. People with social anxiety disorder mind read, where they think, I'm going to walk into this party and no one's going to like me, no one's going to want to talk to me, that person thinks I'm weird, and there's no evidence for that. So part of cognitive therapy is identifying these negative thought patterns and trying to find evidence for them. Behavior, so there's something called cognitive behavioral therapy, so that's the cognitive part. But for anxiety, the hallmark is behavior therapy. You must avoid avoidance. So basically, what we actually want to train our kids and our youth to do is to feel these feelings and be able to manage them. So there's something called interoceptive desensitization. So with my patients who have anxiety, we actually induce anxious feelings. Things like purposely hyperventilate. We might breathe through a straw and hold our nose at the same time. So we're creating, almost mimicking the sensation of what happens during a panic attack, but in a more safe environment, so that when they can almost kind of manage that feeling, so when they have that again, it doesn't have to escalate. Increase the room temperature so that they get hot and sweaty. Because sometimes anxiety works where you're just having a physiological response. Like I said, for me it just started with a clammy mouth. I was not anxious about this talk at all. I have no problem, so to public speak, but it just started with that and it just escalated from there. Try different situations. For OCD, it's a notion of exposure therapy, but it really works for all anxiety. So I have patients, if you have contamination issues, so when I have patients who don't touch things, who don't touch things that touched other things, I have them putting their hands in dirty toilets. I mean, I know it sounds really bizarre, but when you can sit there with your hand in a dirty toilet and not wash it, what we call response prevention, for 2 hours afterwards, you're going to have no problem touching a doorknob after that. So in a sense, the purpose of exposure therapy is actually to raise the level of anxiety. So on a scale of 1 to 10, you want to bring it to an 8, only so that you can habituate to it, which means that what happens is if you are actually in the moment, like I said, the here and now, your amygdala will not get activated. It will eventually go down. As long as you're in the moment. You know, if you're not thinking about, you know, oh my gosh, like this, it's like, oh, my hand is in a dirty toilet. like my hand is in a dirty toilet, I have whatever, there's people urinated in this toilet, my hand is in there. After a while, you just can't get that anxious about it. Strangely enough, intrusive thoughts. If I have that patient I mentioned earlier who had the cancer issue, his exposure therapy, he had to write the word cancer 100 times. He had to wear a t-shirt that said the word cancer on it to school, the school and everyone understood. I mean, it sounds almost sadistic. When I started this training, the first OCD patient I had was a woman who had what's kind of colloquially called hit and run OCD. So she would drive to work and any kind of bump, like even a minor bump, she would start obsessing, like, did I just hit somebody? Like, could I have hit somebody and killed them? So she had to pull over to the side of the road and inspect, and she didn't see anyone, keep driving, and then would drive and think, what if I hit them and they rolled over to the side of the road? So she would have to drive back around the highway and go back, didn't see. Then keep going to work and then think, well, what if they rolled over the side of the road and someone called an ambulance? She would call every local hospital. It was debilitating. So I'm a new trainee, and they said, okay, Roberto, take her in your car. And there was this road in Belmont that was the bumpiest road or speed bumps. They said, just go over the speed bumps. And when she says, oh my gosh, did we hit someone? Do you think we hit someone? You have to say, maybe we did, maybe we didn't. And I'm like, what? Like, oh my gosh, like that's so mean. And they're like, nope, you cannot reassure her. And because for her, it was the uncertainty that was the biggest fear. I mean, with a lot of these things, sometimes it's not even the actual, not that she must have hit somebody, but it's really that uncertainty. So, okay, that's what you do. So I drive her to speed bump. She goes, oh my gosh, like, and at first she would feel it, and then you could tell the obsessions would start. She goes, do you think we hit somebody? Like, it felt like it could have been a body. And I said, maybe we did, maybe we didn't. She goes, oh my God, but if we did, we have to turn back. And we just kept doing it. Her anxiety. God, she called me every name of the book. She said, the police are gonna come after you, and I'm not taking the fall for you. And then it would get really, but the good news is there's a program at McLean, it's called the OCD Institute, and it's a residential program for severe treatment, what they've been called treatment resistant, but they're not actually treatment resistant, individuals with OCD from all over the country. And so they live there, and after 2 weeks, I was going over speed bumps and everything, and she was literally filing her nails. Just like, should I get like a pink nail polish, you think, or like a blue? No anxiety. And now this is 2 to 3 hours a day we're doing this, 5 days a week. And I was like, oh my gosh, she's not even asking about this. This is amazing. And this is the gold standard treatment of OCD and of anxiety in general. So now, of course, like if you're anxious again about anacondas, you don't have to be around an anaconda because unless you experience it, have to. But the main thing is, and it could start with even an imaginal exposure. It could start with also something what we call the worry hour. For kids, we would say it's the worry 15 to 30 minutes. So for example, if your anxiety is so intrusive that it's just getting in the way all the time throughout your day, you say, okay, you know what, we're gonna set aside 7 to 7:20 p.m. tonight, and we're gonna sit down. You're not gonna have any distractions or anything. You're just gonna sit down and you're just gonna worry away. Just worry away. So if you're worried about, you don't know what college you're gonna get into, like just worry away. Now the truth is, when you actually sit in the here and now and just worry, guess what? You can't really worry that much. Worry really breeds itself when it's competing with so many other things that you have to do, when it's intrusive. But when you're sitting there and you're like, okay, I'm worried about getting into college. I'm worried about now what's even better is when patients say, okay, this is boring, like after a while, and I'm like, this is good, because when you're anxious, boredom is not anxiety, and so it's okay to actually expose it. I mean, trust me, it sounds like, oh my gosh, like how can I subject, but this is the gold standard treatment. Mindfulness, which is basically being aware of your thoughts and not judging them, and the difference of saying, I am noticing that I'm obsessing about my future versus I will never amount to anything and I will fail at life. Because when you say, I'm noticing that I'm obsessing about my future, that is a fact. You are obsessing about your future. And it's almost like you're taking distance from it by being mindful of it, like you're reporting on it. That is what we want. In anxiety, we want as much of a wedge from this idea that, oh my gosh, like this is a real sort of thing, as opposed to, oh no, this is a thought that I have. We can have thoughts all the time. We can't control our thoughts, but as long as we sort of name it as such. And there is a lot of wonderful research showing how it actually strengthens the communication between the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex, which is where where all of our logic centers are, basically, when we do that. Just briefly, because I want to leave some time for questions and answers, medication, not meant to take the place of cognitive behavioral therapy, but for moderate to severe levels of anxiety is extremely helpful. In fact, studies show that CBT and medication together represent really the gold standard superior treatment. Now again, this is from moderate to severe. For mild anxiety disorders, we don't see behavior therapy alone actually could be just as superior. CBT alone or medications alone tend to be equally effective, although CBT is longer lasting in terms of less relapse rates. And of course, doing neither of these are going to be least effective. There's no shame in taking medications. They're actually much safer than people will think they are. It's not a sign of moral weakness or ineffective parenting. And it doesn't have to be a last resort. Parents will often say, oh, I'll do medication, that is a last resort. It doesn't have to be the last resort, because when your child is suffering, and when your child is tremendously under the burden of what anxiety is, you just want that relieved. And again, the medication doesn't take away all of the anxiety, but it makes it manageable. It makes them able to now attend to the CBT. Because I'll have patients sometimes, they can't do the CBT because their anxiety is so sky high that they don't get to a level 8. They're just a 10. They're almost like that's their baseline. And I'll say to parents sometimes, I really think, a medication trial will be useful, at least initially, and we'll see, where it goes. The main medication category are what we call the SSRIs, the selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, which basically kind of pump more serotonin, which is one of our many different neurotransmitters into different cells. They're actually antidepressants, but they have significant anti-anxiety properties to them. So everything like fluoxetine or Prozac is probably the oldest SSRI. That is less prescribed for anxiety. That's the classic antidepressant. Typically, you'll see things like paroxetine or Paxil for social anxiety disorder, Luvox or Zoloft for OCD and generalized anxiety disorder, Lexapro, Celexa for phobias. So it can take anywhere from 1 to 8 weeks depending on the disorder. OCD tends to be more on the 8-week realm. But some people see symptom relief. There are side effects to them, and of course that's what you're always balancing, that against whatever symptoms they have. Insomnia, waking, sexual side effects can all be certain side effects. But again, it's very, very important to understand these, even for children, these are not harmful medications. There are medications out there, I treat people with bipolar disorder. Lithium is a mood stabilizer, has significant side effects. But I have patients who would be dead if they weren't on lithium. They've attempted suicide so many times, and lithium literally saved their lives. So they deal with the 50-pound weight gain. They deal with having to get their blood checked every couple of weeks to monitor their levels. It's totally worth it. SSRIs, I've had women who are pregnant who take SSRIs, because if they weren't on SSRIs, they would be so anxious that they would actually cause more distress to their fetus than even any potential minor side effect to the SSRI. And the statistics actually say that even with pregnancy, the only side effect that could potentially is that the child might be a little less responsive at birth, and after a day or two, that you find absolutely no difference between children who were born to mothers who were taking SSRIs. So this is one of my mantras, and I always have this in my office. This is actually the Serenity Statement. The actual one is more of a religious one. It says, God grant me the serenity. The beginning of every Alcoholics Anonymous meeting, they say the Serenity Prayer. But it really is sort of embodies a lot of what we know we have to do in terms of working through anxiety. Grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change. There are just some things that we cannot change, and we have to be okay with that. We have to give up our control in that sense. But give me the courage to change the things that I can, and let's put our energy into what we can control, and let's have the wisdom to know what the difference of that is. And on that, I'm going to end, and I know we have some little time for questions and answers. I'm gonna take some water now, so I don't. Yes.
I have a question for you. You didn't really touch on it. I don't know if it's in the wheelhouse of what you're talking about, but with anxiety in kids, is it anxiety comes first and then ADHD, or is it ADHD causes anxiety?
It's a good question. So the question is, with people with ADHD and anxiety, what comes first? So ADHD, I would say definitely is first. Like ADHD, I think of as something, we are just born with. It's sort of like that right there is almost the fundamental foundation of, how I see it is who I am in a lot of ways. Now, 1/3 of people with ADHD have anxiety. And so what you'll often see is that the anxiety can come almost as secondary to their ADHD symptoms. So some people with ADHD don't have, so 2/3 of people with ADHD don't have anxiety. So what we know about that 1/3 that does are individuals typically where the executive functioning deficits are much more severe. So if you have a hard time with organizing, prioritizing, getting your homework, school becomes more stressful, then you're going to see that anxiety build up. But what's very important, and I'm glad you asked, is that for parents who have children with ADHD, with anxiety, that a lot of times different school systems, and I've been part of these meetings, certainly as a parent, but also as a clinician in different districts, who say, oh, well, it's not the learning disability, it's not the ADHD, it's that your kid has anxiety. It's like, well, but let's understand where that anxiety is coming from. Of course, wouldn't you have anxiety if, let's say, you have ADHD or you have dyslexia and you're not able to access the curriculum the way that other people are? Then maybe we need. That's the primary thing we need to really focus on before we kind of treat the anxiety. And some schools are great about that, and some honestly are terrible about it. So yes, I would always see this that the ADD is kind of always there. Like you can see, there's interesting research showing literally at 6 months old, in infancy, certain traits that kids who later, and adults who are later diagnosed with ADHD prominently have. It's just there. But yeah, so the anxiety will often follow.
Can I ask one more question
Sure.
attached? Can you effectively treat ADHD and anxiety together with medication?
Great question. So can you treat ADHD and anxiety together with medication? So this is the interesting relationship, is that stimulant medication, which is quite safe for individuals with ADHD, that's Ritalin, Adderall, Concerta, can be very effective for ADHD symptoms. However, for people who also have an anxiety disorder, sometimes that makes the anxiety worse. And the reason for that is that they're better able to focus on the thing they're anxious about. And so my OCD patient, this is particularly true for people with ADD and OCD. So 30% of people with OCD have ADHD and they cannot take stimulants because they're like, oh, I'm better able to focus on the professor or the teacher, but I'm also better able to focus on these horrific and horrendous intrusive thoughts that I have. So we go with the medication for the OCD or the anxiety and then work on the ADHD behaviorally. However, I've had other patients who have both, who, if their anxiety is very secondary to the ADHD, and they take a stimulant, I sometimes see dramatic results where their anxiety almost diminishes because they're on a stimulant. And that tells us, wow, so much of that anxiety was either this executive functioning issue, or because anxiety disorders are an attentional issue. It's just you're paying too much attention to something and not properly moving away from it. And a stimulant medication for some people can properly help them move away from that thought onto what they should be thinking about. So what I always say, if somebody's willing to look at it, is the good news about stimulants is that the day you take them, whether they work or not. They're very fast, they have a very short half-life, so they work very, very quickly in the system. And if they're not working for you, you go off them and they're out of your system within a day or two. So if you're willing to sort of look at that, again, with the SSRIs, it's going to take a little bit, more time to do that. But I've really seen, I would say with the exception of OCD, where most of my OCD patients cannot take a stimulant. Most of my OCD plus ADHD patients cannot take a stimulant. But as far as generalized anxiety, phobias, social anxiety, I've seen honestly 50-50. I've seen some people who actually do better when they're taking that. Yes?
Come on with the ADHD. which can create, maybe exacerbate some OCD tendencies. Am I picking up bad path under that?
So what was the first thing you said about ADD?
Probably ADD, family history.
Yeah.
And we use a lot of behavioral, like a very highly structured environment.
Yes.
But I see from that, there's definitely some OCD tendencies.
Yeah.
Going down that path, is that something that I'm exacerbating with
It's
allowing that?
a great question. So if you're creating this very, very fixed structure, because there might be ADHD symptoms, is it sort of almost setting up where someone could be almost more kind of obsessional, more sort of OCD about? This is a very interesting thing, because people with ADD have, I wouldn't call it obsessional per se, but I would say almost like a hyper specificity of things. Like I am very specific and precise about how I write papers, because I don't have a long bandwidth of how I do these things. So every paper I've written since I was in the 3rd grade, I have music playing in the background. I wrote my dissertation to Green Day, Nirvana, and the Ramones, and Joe Jett, and I thanked them in my dissertation acknowledgements page. And I chew gum as a way of doing. I have a very specific. So it's interesting because with ADD, like I'm very, very punctual with time, but this is not a natural thing for me. So my kids, and we're very open about talking about all these things, they don't know me as someone who's like late for things. So they see me as someone who's a bit compulsive actually about time. And I say, well, I'm like that because if I wasn't on top of it, I have been really late for things and things like that. So there is that sort of an adaptation in a sense when you actually do have certain executive functioning skills. Now, what I would say as a parent is that over time, when they're very, very young, that's perfectly normal and that's acceptable to do. As they get older, you want to start either giving them some responsibility for some of that structure, not have it to be sort of as precise and see how they deal with, a little bit of that change, because the reality is in life that there's going to be those kind of changes and transitions. But it's fine to say, you know what, it's important to go to bed at 9 o'clock and I'm gonna be, we're gonna adhere to that. But at the same time, it's, if somebody is super compulsive, like I have a patient who starts to get anxious, so she doesn't fall asleep immediately at 9 o'clock, because in her mind, if she doesn't get enough sleep, she's not going to be as attentive at school the next day, and if she's not as attentive, she's not going to do well. If she doesn't do well, she's going to make her parents very disappointed. If they're disappointed in her, they're not going to love her as much. This is what's going on in this poor little girl's mind. And so what I said to the parents, so that's a good example of, it's good to have a sleep schedule, but in this case, I said to the parents, I want us to sort of be flexible with that bedtime a little bit. Make it, because the way that structure with OCD or anxiety works is anything but like 9 o'clock for her would make her anxious. So we literally was like, okay, bedtime is now at 9:05. It's 5 minutes. But the way that anxiety works is when you know it's anxiety versus like the kind of adaptive rituals that people with ADD, for example, would have, is how intolerant they get to that. And for her, it's like, no, it has to be 9:05. So I have patients, for example, with OCD and eating disorders who they run on a treadmill and they have to run for 120 minutes. And honestly, the first goal might be, okay, tomorrow I want you to run for 119 minutes. That's literally 60 seconds. The people where you'll see the anxiety, they're like, I can't do that. It has to be 120 minutes. Like, I can't. And so it's kind of, as they get older, almost kind of playing with it. Because I always say to parents, it's really important, especially if your kids are going to go off to college, it's okay if they fall, it's okay if they trip, in middle school and high school a little bit, because you're there to sort of help kind of pick up, those pieces and sort of work with that. But they need to start developing their own system as they get older. But when they're younger, absolutely, for kids who really need that, they'll need that structure, and that's fine as well.
What's a comfortable age when that should be introduced?
I would say typically in middle school, you want, because the demands of middle school start to kind of warrant that. It's like you almost kind of think of like where they are in life and what the demands outside of the house are going to be. And because if the demands outside of the house are totally changing and they're not changing in the house, they're not going to have any way of adapting to that. So I would say typically middle school, but depending on what school structure your child is in. I think we have time for a couple more questions. Yes.
Could I see the exact, the adoption slide?
Oh, yes. So basically, there is research that shows that individuals who are adopted actually have double the risk for anxiety disorders. And there are actually interesting statistics that even show that domestic adoptions actually have higher risk than international adoptions could have. Others show the opposite. Others show actually that with the exception of Asian countries, like Asian countries somehow have lower risk of anxiety than adopted children from other countries. But that risk is actually associated with the biological parent's genetics, because studies show that individuals who give their children up for adoption tend to have mental illness or mental health issues. Now, that doesn't mean that your child, if they're adopted, is going to develop a mental illness, but it does show they do have higher risk for it. Because with the exception of Asian countries, and part of that may be that in a lot of, in China, for example, that there's economic reasons or a lot of other reasons why people might give their child, particularly girls, up for adoption. But perinatally, there's a lot of self-care for that child. So if you imagine, two 15-year-olds and that have relations, the girl gets pregnant, that there's a higher likelihood that you see ADHD, impulsivity, depression, bipolar disorder. So as a result, even if that child is not raised by their biological parents, they carry those genetics. And so there are amazing studies looking at identical twins who were reared apart and then they reunite many years later, and it is stunning, the similarities. The same jobs, they marry women who look the same, they name their dogs the same thing. It's really weird, but it really shows it's such an interesting study of how genetics really plays a big part. They are 4 times more likely to attempt suicide, but interestingly, there are statistics that also show that overall, children who are adopted get better access to mental health resources, and part of that may be that people who adopt children are often of a higher financial status, are often more attuned, perhaps, and more sensitive to those children's needs, are generally more educated. And then just briefly, since I'm on it, LGBT youth also double the risk of anxiety, either because of actual or anticipatory fears of homophobia, passing as heterosexual or cisgender, actual or perceived discrimination, bullying, violence. Studies show that transgender and bisexual youth are actually at slightly higher risk than even gay and lesbian groups. And with bisexuality, part of that may be that a lot of bisexual individuals don't feel that they sort of land in either community, and sometimes they're not necessarily accepted by the gay or the heterosexual community. Lesbians of LGBT groups, lesbians tend to have the less risk, but still a significantly higher risk than heterosexual women do of anxiety. And transgender women and gay men, particularly of color, are at highest risk of being a victim of violence. So there is a real fear there. There's a real anxiety. That anxiety is somewhat validated in these experiences, but it can absolutely explode. Also, too, my email is here. If there are any questions or anything that people have that they couldn't get to, please feel free to email me. I don't have, I'm so in the dark ages. I don't have a website, I don't have Facebook, I don't have Twitter. Part of it is I think I'd be overwhelmed with a lot of it, although all my colleagues are like, you should have a Facebook page, and when I write my next book, maybe I'll do one. But please feel free to email me. I love questions. If you want any scientific articles, everything I told you is backed up by empirical research. If you want an actual article to look at, I'll provide you the article, the actual PDF if I have it, or at least the reference for it. And thank you all very much for coming on a Thursday night.
Thank you, everybody, and get home safely.